guys, the Benidorm Enthusiast here. In today's video we're going to be going through some very important information for tourists coming to Spain from outside the EU, including the recent update about entry requirements which has caused all kinds of confusion. We'll also be briefly covering the 90-day rule and passport validity. Serious stuff, and definitely important if you have holidays planned in the near future and are concerned about what you may or may not need. Okay, the first thing for people coming from third countries, that's countries outside the EU, which of course now includes the UK. Spain has not scrapped all COVID restrictions or COVID entry requirements yet. Despite this being reported by various media outlets, on the Spanish government website, the UK government website and the Spain tourism website, it still clearly states that to enter Spain you need to be either fully vaccinated, have a recovery certificate or a negative diagnostic test result. What has been scrapped this last week is the Spanish health form. That's the SPTH form, which was the equivalent to the UK's passenger locator form. And along with scrapping this is the obligation to present the COVID pass QR code that this form generates when entering Spain. That's also been lifted. This was scrapped a while ago for fully vaccinated passengers, but was still in place for those entering with the recovery or diagnostic certificate. Not anymore, it's completely gone now. Nobody has to worry about filling this form in anymore. It does not exist. So the question on everybody's lips now is, without the obligation to fill in this form or show the COVID pass QR code, who is checking that people entering are fulfilling entry requirements? Who is checking people are vaccinated, have a recovery certificate or a negative test result? Well, there may still be random checks done. Now I must emphasise the may part of that last sentence. The airports are removing the sanitary control points already. They're the sort of COVID checkpoints that people had to go through and show their COVID passes. Alicante started dismantling theirs almost immediately after this announcement. So most people will be coming through without any checks whatsoever. Over the summer, even before this announcement, some airports had reduced the control to random checks to ease congestion. Alicante seems to have been one of the more relaxed airports, going on feedback from recent arrivals. Some people have been several times and not been asked once to show any documents. Others, even those fully vaccinated who didn't have to do the locator form or have the QR code, have still been asked to show their vaccination certificate. It is completely random, and I think now after this most recent update these random checks will become even less frequent. But just bear it in mind that you could still be asked to show either your vaccine certificate, your recovery certificate or your diagnostic certificate. That's your negative test result upon entry to Spain. So what will happen if you don't have these documents? There's no set procedure really for this circumstance. What we've seen recently, again even before this update, was that people were being given a COVID test on arrival at the airport and allowed to pass after the test showed up negative. If it's positive, I would imagine that entry will be denied. What will happen after that, I'm not sure. But it's not even guaranteed that you will be given a COVID test there and then. You could just be given a temperature check or a visual assessment. You could be asked to sign a disclosure form. What exactly happens will depend on the resources available at the airport at that time. You may well indeed still be allowed to pass without any hold up at all. So it's not clear cut at all at the moment. While they are making these changes to try and simplify the situation and streamline the entry process at airports, they do seem to make it more complicated every time they make changes. Only you can decide how prepared to be with your paperwork or if it's worth the risk not bringing the documents with you. What we will do over the next week or so is speak to people coming in and get their experiences firsthand of the airport entry procedure, and we'll bring that to you in another video. I'm now going to recap over the 3 entry requirement options for those of you that want to make sure you're compliant, because we're still getting loads of questions about what's considered fully vaccinated, the time frame of tests and things like that. So hopefully we'll answer all those questions for you now. The first option is to be fully vaccinated. That's the 2 jabs for the 2-part vaccines that were rolled out in the UK. If your second jab was over 270 days ago, you must also have had a booster to be considered fully vaccinated. There's no time limit on the booster jab, so if your booster was over 270 days ago, that's absolutely fine. The booster does not expire. The 270-day time limit does not apply for the booster jab. The second option is the recovery certificate, which must have been issued at least 11 days after the first positive test and up to 180 days after. The third option is with a negative diagnostic test result. Accepted tests include a PCR, which must be done within 72 hours of departure to Spain, or antigen, which must be done within 24 hours of departure to Spain. For under 12s, there are no COVID entry requirements. In other words, none of the 3 entry options are applicable. And for 12 to 17s, the 270-day limit for the second jab does not apply to be considered fully vaccinated. So those in the 12 to 17 age group with the 2 jabs but no booster are still considered fully vaccinated, no matter how long ago they received the second jab. As just mentioned, but I'll say it again, nobody now needs to complete the health form. The passenger locator form does not exist anymore, and you probably won't be asked to provide any proof of the entry requirements. But they are still listed as entry requirements on the government websites. Okay, a quick mention of the other entry requirements that the UK media blew up out of all proportion at the start of the summer, and which we did a full video explaining. This was all about the minimum spending money. Spain, the same as all other EU countries and the UK, has certain basic, not COVID related, entry rules. Third country nationals may be asked to provide additional documents at the border, such as a valid return ticket, proof of where you're staying, or proof you can support yourself during your stay. As explained in the video we did, these rules are to safeguard against people suspected of entering Spain with the intention of staying illegally. They're not being applied to the average tourist, and this is still the case. A very, very high majority of tourists entering pass through border control without any issues or any questions asked relating to this. If you want to watch the full video we did on this, the link will be in the YouTube description below. Next question to address: are there any COVID restrictions still in place once you're in Spain? The only real restriction that remains is the use of the mask in a few places: medical centres, pharmacies and public transport. So if you're planning on using the bus or the train, going on coach trips or even taxis, have a mask with you to put on. Also, you never know when you might need to get something from the pharmacy, so if you have a mask with you, you'll have no problems. You rarely see people wearing masks here now, except for in these places, and even some public transport services such as taxis are very relaxed, but others, buses and trains for example, are still strict, and coaches seems to be a bit of a grey area where some are insisting and others aren't. So just be aware that legally they are still required, and you can be refused service if you're not willing to wear a mask. The next thing I want to go over today is nothing to do with COVID, it's to do with how long you can stay in Spain as a UK tourist since Brexit. The Schengen area 90 in 180 rule. We've had a lot of questions about this recently, so I thought we would cover it briefly on this video. With the UK's exit from the EU, UK nationals' freedom of movement within the EU came to an end as well. But we are are still able to travel within the Schengen area without a visa to a certain extent. UK citizens are now subject to the limitation of 90 days within any 180 days. The 90 days can be used all in one go, in one long stay, or split up into smaller stays, as is done by most tourists. And it applies to the whole Schengen area, not just Spain. The count begins as soon as a traveller enters the Schengen area until the day they depart. It's not the simplest to calculate, as the 180 days is constantly rolling, and this is what causes a lot of confusion. It's easiest to think of this 180 days as a moving block of time that is counted backwards from each day of staying in the Schengen area. For example, if a traveller entered Spain on the 1st of September 2022, the 180-day block of time would be calculated backwards from that date. So it'd go back to the 5th of March 2022. And each day spent in the Schengen zone during that time period will count towards the 90 permitted days. Each day someone stays in the Schengen area will advance the 180-day time frame. This is what's meant by a rolling 180. So the calculation on 2nd of September 2022 would advance the 180-day block by 1 day, so it'd start on the 6th of March 2022. Still confused? Yeah, I think even I am, to be honest. It's very difficult to explain, never mind understand. Probably the best way to check yourself if you're unsure is to use one of the Schengen calculators online. We'll post a link in the description to one of the good ones. Anyone wanting to spend more than 90 days in the Schengen area, you need to apply for a visa. There are several different ones, and it is a complex issue. My recommendation is that you contact the Spanish Embassy in the UK, as the process for applying starts with them, and they will be able to inform you best on your options. Last thing I want to cover today is passport validity for travel to the EU. Another thing complicated by the UK's withdrawal from the EU. Passports must meet two requirements to be valid for travel. The first requirement, your passport must be less than 10 years old on the day you enter. This is where you check the date of issue. The second requirement, your passport must be valid for at least 3 months after the day you leave. This is where you check the expiry date. You need to check both the issue date and the expiry date if you're close to the limits, and ensure both dates fall within the requirements just mentioned. If you renewed your passport early, you may have had extra months added onto the expiry date, but these months won't count when it comes to ensuring your passport is less than 10 years old, which is why you need to check the date of issue to ensure you're following the first requirement as well. I have to say, going over all this, it does make it sound far more complicated than it actually is. Most tourists I speak to, and I speak to a lot, are saying how surprisingly easy travel to Spain has been on their recent journeys, despite all these rules and regulations. But it also seems that many tourists are still confused and worried, as we're seeing daily on social media posts. So I hope we've covered most things in this video to put your minds at ease. If you do have any further questions, feel free to put them in the comments, and we'll try our best to get the answers for you. Thanks for watching. Click the subscribe button so you don't miss any of our future videos. And also check us out on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter and TikTok at the Benidorm Enthusiast. Stay positive and stay safe.